Stop him! He tried to steal it! Linda Harrington's voice rang out, sharp and unwavering. The moment she spoke, Jordan Evans was forced to his knees. Cold tile, steel cuffs, a crushing grip on his arm. Officer Reed held him down, unmoved by the panic in his eyes. "You really thought you'd get away with this?" His voice was calm, certain. Jordan's heart pounded. "I didn't take anything." The words came fast, breathless, drowned out by the murmurs around him. A woman clutched her purse. A man whispered, shaking his head. No one questioned. No one intervened. Linda stood tall, arms crossed. Smug, satisfied, unshaken. Jordan inhaled sharply, willing himself to stay still. One wrong move, and this turns into something worse. Then, blackness. 1 hour earlier, Jordan Evans stood at the glass counter, his fingers resting lightly on the cool surface. Inside, nestled against dark velvet, was the silver charm bracelet, delicate, shimmering under the store's bright lights. It was exactly as he had imagined. His chest rose and fell with quiet anticipation. Months of working extra shifts, tucking away every tip, every hard-earned dollar had led him to this moment. He had pictured it so many times, walking into the store, buying the perfect gift for his little sister, and walking out with it in a pristine, ribbon-wrapped box. He met the clerk's gaze. "I'd like to see that bracelet." Linda Harrington didn't move. Her eyes flicked over him, sharp, assessing, like he was a math problem that didn't quite add up. Jordan stayed still, waiting. She tilted her head, lips pressing together before she spoke. "You sure about that?" Her voice was smooth, almost casual. Almost. "That one's not cheap." Jordan exhaled slowly through his nose. He had been prepared for this, not just today, but every day of his life. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his worn leather wallet. He flipped it open, withdrawing a neat stack of bills, counting them swiftly with practiced ease. Linda's brows lifted slightly. Jordan didn't miss it, the flicker of something that wasn't quite surprise, but not far from it. "I'm sure." His tone was measured, steady. Linda didn't reach for the bracelet. Instead, she let out a quiet scoff, shaking her head slightly, as if she had just heard a particularly amusing joke. "That's a lot of cash for someone your age." Her voice dropped, just enough to feel conspiratorial. "Where'd you get it?" Jordan stilled. A subtle shift. Not in posture, not in expression, but in energy. His grip tightened slightly around the bills, though his face remained neutral. "I worked for it." Linda's lips curled at the edges, but the smile never reached her eyes. "Really?" She tapped a manicured nail against the glass, her gaze unwavering. "What kind of work?" Jordan inhaled slowly. "I work at Henry's Diner," he said. "Bus tables. Wash dishes. Save my tips." Linda hummed, a low, doubtful sound. Behind Jordan, the quiet murmur of the store continued, but something had shifted. A woman near the entrance adjusted the strap of her purse, pulling it closer to her side. A man by the watches stole a glance in Jordan's direction before leaning toward his wife, whispering something under his breath. Jordan felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken assumptions hanging heavy in the air. He forced his shoulders to remain relaxed. He wouldn't let them see. Linda, however, was in no hurry. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers still drumming against the glass. "You expect me to believe that?" Jordan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I don't expect anything," he said. Linda smiled then, tight, skeptical, patronizing. She let the sound sit between them for a beat too long before straightening, finally reaching beneath the counter. Jordan exhaled slowly, a small victory, but as she pulled out the black velvet tray, she didn't place it on the counter immediately. Instead, she held it just a little longer than necessary, her grip firm. Jordan could feel it, the anticipation in her posture, the way her gaze lingered on him. waiting. For what, he wasn't sure. But she was expecting something. A mistake. A slip. A misstep. Jordan stayed perfectly still. Linda placed the tray on the glass with deliberate care. The silver charm bracelet lay nestled in the fabric, gleaming under the lights. Jordan reached for it. Linda's fingers twitched. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before picking it up. The metal was cool against his fingertips. Light. Delicate. He turned it over carefully, watching the charms dangle between his fingers. A soft sigh of relief pressed against his ribs. It was perfect. But then, a shift in his grip, a fraction of an inch. The bracelet slipped. Time slowed. The soft clink of metal against glass barely registered before the bracelet tumbled over the counter's edge, hitting the floor with a quiet ping. The sound, though small, rang out like a gunshot. The store went still. Jordan froze. Linda's entire expression snapped from mild amusement to something sharper, colder. Her lips parted, and for half a second, Jordan hoped, she would let it go. Then, "Hey!" Her voice shot through the store like an alarm. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Jordan took a step back, his pulse thudding violently in his ears. Linda's hand flew to her chest, eyes widening in exaggerated shock. "You tried to pocket it, didn't you?" Jordan's breath hitched. "What?" Linda pointed to the bracelet now resting on the tile floor, her hand shaking with performative outrage. "I saw you!" Her voice carried, clear, authoritative. "You thought I wasn't looking and you tried to steal it." A woman near the entrance gasped. The murmurs grew. Jordan took another step back. "I didn't." Linda didn't let him finish. Her hand darted toward the phone beneath the counter. "Security! Call the police, now!" Jordan's stomach plummeted. A man near the watches shook his head, muttering something to his wife. A couple at the necklace display turned, their expressions shifting from curiosity to thinly veiled judgment. Jordan's fingers curled into his palms. Not this. Not like this. He opened his mouth, but the store was already against him. Linda's voice rang out again, urgent, breathless. "He was about to run. I stopped him just in time." Jordan's jaw clenched. "That's not true." A woman pulled her child closer. Someone near the entrance whispered, "Typical." Jordan's breath came shallow, fast. This was happening. He knew exactly how it would go. The phone was already ringing. Linda's eyes burned with certainty. The air felt thick, suffocating. Jordan glanced down at the bracelet. So small, so harmless now, lying at the center of a storm. He could feel it unraveling. The judgment, the weight, the inevitable. The sound of distant sirens clawed at his ears. His stomach twisted. Then, red and blue lights flashed against the storefront glass. Linda watched him closely, waiting. The bracelet slipped. Jordan barely had time to react before it tumbled from his fingers, hitting the glass counter with a soft clink before bouncing off the edge. He reached instinctively, but it was too late. A single, metallic ping echoed as it struck the marble floor. For a brief second, everything was still. Then, "Hey!" Linda's voice cut through the store, sharp and commanding. Heads turned. The quiet murmur of conversation ceased. She took a step back, one hand pressing to her chest as if she had just been struck. Her other hand shot forward, finger locked on Jordan, her expression shifting from controlled to outright alarm. "He tried to steal it! Call the cops!" Jordan's pulse spiked. "What? No!" But she wasn't listening. She was already moving, already reaching for the phone beneath the counter. "He grabbed it off the counter. I caught him just in time." Jordan's mind reeled, scrambling to process what was happening. A man near the watches stiffened, his hand instinctively tightening around his wife's arm. A woman near the entrance gasped, stepping back. Another shopper lifted their phone, angling the camera toward him. The shift was instant. The room had already decided. Linda had made sure of that. Jordan's breath came faster. "I didn't take anything." His voice was even, controlled, but the words felt hollow in the thick air of the store. Linda's stare hardened. "I saw you," the words rang out, carrying weight heavier than truth. Jordan took a step back, palms open, a silent gesture of surrender. But the movement, small, barely noticeable, seemed to confirm what they had already chosen to believe. A woman near the exit clutched her purse tighter. A man whispered something, shaking his head. Their faces told the story before a single word left their lips. Of course he did it. Jordan's stomach twisted. This was spiraling too fast. Linda's hand gripped the phone tighter. "Yes, I need police at Harrington Fine Jewelry. We have a thief." Her voice trembled. Believable, intentional. "He tried to run when I confronted him. I'm afraid he might get violent." Jordan's fingers curled into fists at his sides. Aggressive, violent. The accusation sat on his chest, suffocating. He forced himself to stay still. Every instinct told him to move, to defend himself, to do something. But he knew how that would end. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Stay calm, stay still, stay alive." Linda turned slightly, angling herself toward the crowd, ensuring they heard every word. "He shoved me." Jordan's breath hitched. "That's a lie." The words sat on his tongue, desperate to escape. But what was the point? The shift had already happened. A woman pulled her child closer. Someone near the entrance muttered something under their breath. Jordan could feel the weight of their assumptions pressing in on him. He wasn't a customer anymore. He was a threat. Through the store's front windows, the distant flicker of red and blue appeared. His stomach clenched. The sirens were getting louder. Linda finally set the phone down, exhaling like she had just escaped some terrible danger. She smoothed a hand over her blouse, composing herself. Then she met Jordan's gaze, a slight curve of her lips. She had won. Jordan's chest rose and fell with short, uneven breaths. This was happening. He turned toward the entrance. A few feet. That's all it was. If he moved, if he so much as turned too quickly. No. His feet stayed planted. The weight of every stair in the room pressed against him. Someone near the entrance shifted, inching toward the door. A man crossed his arms, already convinced of his guilt. Linda's breathing steadied. Her gaze flicked to the door as the first squad car rolled to a stop outside. Jordan clenched his fists, his nails biting into his palms. The lights flashed against the glass, red, blue, red. The store door swung open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Jordan's breath came short. His body screamed at him to move, to speak, to explain. But he knew better. It wouldn't matter. One of the officers locked eyes with Linda. She pointed at Jordan, her voice unwavering. "That's him." The officer nodded once. Then he stepped forward. The store door swung open with a decisive clang, drawing every gaze toward the entrance. 2 officers stepped inside, each movement heavy with authority. Their uniforms bore the mark of official power, and red-blue reflections swept across polished counters, flickering like restless ghosts along pristine surfaces. Linda stood behind the counter, shoulders lifted in feigned relief. Her eyes latched onto Officer Reed, guiding his attention to Jordan. She spoke quickly, voice brimming with accusation. "Over here. He's the one." Officer Reed, tall and solid, wasted no time. He moved forward, his expression void of hesitation. The younger officer, Harris, followed with a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Jordan breathed in, slow but unsteady. He'd seen exactly how this played out on countless news clips. In those moments, the suspect often had no say, no chance to explain. Now it was happening to him. Reed's voice emerged hard and direct. "Show me your hands." Jordan stood rooted, shoulders tense, feeling a chill creeping over his skin. Every eye in the store seemed to pin him down, as if their collective judgment had already sealed his fate. He raised his hands in plain sight, fingers spread wide. "I didn't do anything wrong." Linda stepped aside, allowing Reed a clear path. "He was trying to grab the bracelet," she said. "I told him to leave it alone, but he wouldn't listen." Jordan's heart pounded. "That's not true." He tried to keep his voice level, though indignation pressed against his ribcage. Harris hovered behind Reed, gaze shifting between Jordan and Linda, as though unsure where the truth lay. But he remained silent, letting Reed take the lead. Reed's hand flew toward Jordan's arm. "Hands behind your back." Jordan complied, each breath measured, each movement careful. The metallic snap of cuffs felt jarring, final. In that instant, Jordan's world condensed into the cold band around his wrists, locking him into guilt before he could offer any defense. Linda watched with a pursed smile, arms crossed. A handful of onlookers inched closer, drawn by the spectacle. The overhead lights glinted on the polished glass, illuminating their expressions, part fascination, part disquiet. Jordan's pulse hammered. He felt Reed's grip tighten as the officer nudged him downward until both knees pressed the unforgiving surface. It felt shockingly cool against his jeans. He couldn't ignore the humiliation threading through every part of him. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Harris's wary expression. The younger officer looked as though he wanted to object, yet didn't. Jordan wondered what internal conflict might be swirling behind those uncertain eyes. Reed glanced at Linda. "You saw him with the bracelet?" She nodded, arms still folded. "He picked it up, tried to slip away. If I hadn't shouted, he'd have run." Jordan wanted to speak, to refute, to shout his innocence. Instead, he swallowed the anger burning in his throat and forced himself to remain calm. "Look at the security footage," he managed through gritted teeth. "It fell." Reed didn't dignify that with an answer. His grip only tightened, forcing Jordan's torso lower. "Quiet," he ordered. Jordan exhaled shakily, turning his head enough to see a smattering of customers watching. A hushed tension hung over them. Some appeared uneasy, others intrigued, but none stepped up to intervene. Harris shifted, clearing his throat. "Should we check the camera first?" Reed dismissed the suggestion with a sharp look. "We'll handle that at the station." A flicker of discomfort passed over Harris's features, but he held his stance, not daring to contradict his superior. Linda, catching Harris's hesitation, shot him a glance brimming with silent reprimand. Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his breath. He remembered every word his mother had drilled into him. Stay calm. Don't resist. Prove them wrong with facts, not with force. He opened his eyes, speaking low. "I need to call my mother," Reed sneered. "Yeah? And what's she gonna do?" Jordan caught a faint shift in Harris's expression, a trace of curiosity, maybe doubt. The tension in the store felt like a thick cloak, draping every person in a sense of inescapable dread. Linda took a small step back, letting Reed keep Jordan pinned. She lifted her chin, feigning a sense of righteousness. He insisted he could afford that bracelet. He had a suspicious amount of cash on him. A man near the display cases murmured in agreement, nodding subtly. Another pressed record on his phone again, capturing each second. That footage, Jordan realized, might be the only unbiased witness. Reed pulled Jordan upright, not gently. Jordan's knees scraped as he found his balance. Though his wrists were bound, he managed to keep his voice level. "I'm allowed a phone call." Reed's cold gaze bored into him. "At the station." He started guiding Jordan toward the exit, but Jordan dug in his heels, forced to resist physically to avoid being dragged. Harris spoke up, voice quiet but firm. "He can make one call here, can't he?" "We're supposed to confirm the facts." He hesitated. "Especially if he's requesting it." Reed shot Harris a glare. "You want to question my approach, officer?" His tone carried a warning. "We've got plenty of probable cause." Jordan swallowed, air thick in his lungs. Even so, he latched onto Harris's brief show of support. "Please," he said, voice subdued but unwavering. "Let me call her now." Reed paused, annoyance crossing his face. A brief standoff. Then he jerked his head, signaling permission with clear reluctance. "Fine. One call." The store felt eerily silent as Reed let Jordan pull out his phone. Hands cuffed, movements clumsy but purposeful. Each beep of the keypad seemed to echo. Jordan raised the phone to his ear, heart pounding like a drum. "Mom," he said, voice trembling despite his effort to stay composed. "I'm at Harrington Fine Jewelry. They just put me in cuffs." A hush fell over the store. Reed stiffened, annoyance transforming into something else. Uncertainty, perhaps. Linda's gaze narrowed, confusion slipping into her glare. Harris watched intently, his grip on the situation shifting. Jordan held the phone, waiting for the response on the other end, determined to see it through. The doorway swung wide, revealing a woman with a poised stance and an unreadable expression. She stepped inside Harrington Fine Jewelry without haste. Yet there was something resolute in every footfall. Her hair was pulled back, neat and purposeful, and her gaze flicked briefly over the tense scene before landing squarely on Officer Reed. She said nothing at first. Officer Harris, standing slightly behind Reed, glanced her way, uncertain. The woman's heels clicked softly against the polished floor, each step echoing through the hushed space. Some customers sidled aside, their curiosity piqued by this sudden arrival. Linda Harrington watched warily, her arms still crossed over her chest as if she could shield herself from whatever was about to happen. Jordan Evans, wrists cuffed, stood with a determined set to his jaw. He seemed to recognize the newcomer instantly, a fleeting relief flashing in his eyes. The woman halted near the counter, a calm yet formidable presence. She directed her attention to Reed, ignoring Linda's suspicious stare. "I'd like to know," she said, her voice low and composed, "if you truly intend to arrest my son." Reed looked her up and down, unimpressed. He was taller by a few inches, but the difference in height did nothing to diminish the authority emanating from her. "Your son?" His tone was dismissive, as though the notion were ridiculous. She nodded, not shifting her gaze. "Yes, that boy with the handcuffs around his wrists." Harris blinked, eyes darting from the boy to the woman. Linda stiffened, still behind the counter, as if the mention of a mother figure threatened to unravel her carefully constructed accusation. Reed, maintaining his grip on Jordan's arm, gave a short, derisive laugh. "Who are you to get involved in this, ma'am?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she assessed him with cool detachment, letting the tension simmer. Her next words were steady, each syllable measured. "Are you certain this is the course of action you want to take?" Reed's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by a stranger who had strode into a scene he believed he controlled. "Ma'am," he said, voice clipped, "I'm going to have to ask you to step back. We're handling a theft case here, a serious one." A flicker of something passed across her features, maybe disdain, maybe sorrow. Jordan shifted, the cuffs jingling faintly, but he remained silent. His eyes, however, stayed on the woman, trust and anticipation mingling on his face. The woman's posture remained relaxed, though her tone acquired an edge. "Serious, you say? And you're confident about these accusations?" Linda bristled at that, taking a step forward. "He was caught red-handed," she insisted, lips curling in annoyance at having to explain herself to yet another person. "We have every right to detain him until the police can sort it out." Without looking at Linda, the woman spoke calmly. "And you are?" Linda hesitated, as though the question had thrown her off balance. "I'm Linda Harrington," she answered, eyes narrowing. "This is my store, and that young man—" She stabbed a finger toward Jordan, tried to steal a bracelet. The woman's gaze flicked to Linda for half a heartbeat, then returned to Reed. I see. So you believe a theft has occurred. Reed's grip on Jordan tightened slightly. That's right. We have probable cause. Probable cause, she echoed quietly. Her eyes moved to Officer Harris, who swallowed under her scrutiny, but said nothing. Jordan exhaled softly, the tension in his shoulders ever present. He was waiting for something, some shift in the atmosphere, a moment that would tip the scales. The woman took another step closer. Reed tensed, his guard evidently rising. Look, he said sharply, we don't need outsiders complicating this. If he's your son, you can speak with him at the station once we book him. Her jaw flexed, a barely perceptible sign of rising anger. I'm not an outsider, she replied, voice still calm despite the undercurrent of steel. Reed gave a short, humorless laugh. Then who are you? The woman didn't answer right away. She studied Reed's face as if gauging how far he was willing to push this. Then, with a deliberate grace, she reached into her jacket pocket. Jordan watched, breath caught in his throat. Linda's brows drew together in a scowl. Officer Harris shifted, one hand poised near his own belt, as though unsure if she meant harm. But the woman merely withdrew an ID wallet. What I am, she said softly, is the one person you'll regret ignoring. Reed narrowed his eyes, skepticism evident. I doubt that, he muttered. A silent beat stretched. Eyes in the store swung from the woman to Reed, waiting to see who would bend. Linda's jaw clenched, her irritation growing at being overshadowed. Finally, the woman laid the slim wallet on the counter, flipping it open with a precise motion. She hadn't formally introduced herself, but the words on her identification spoke volumes. Olivia Evans. The faint glimmer of a federal badge shone under the store's overhead lights. At the sight, Reed's complacency wavered. He leaned in, eyes scanning the badge before flicking uncertainly to the woman's face. Harris edged closer, curiosity etched on his features. Jordan inhaled, relief mingling with a flicker of triumph. He knew that once Reed realized the significance, the power dynamic would shift. Linda, however, had no such clarity. She frowned, failing to grasp what she was looking at. But the hardened set of Reed's shoulders said otherwise. He recognized the seal, the authority behind it. An electric hush settled over the store. Customers who had been inching away now leaned in, sensing a change in the air. Olivia let her fingertips rest on the open badge, gaze unwavering. Officer Reed's bravado began to crack, confusion mingling with a growing sense of dread. Linda peered at the ID, her face draining of color in slow realization. Jordan stood there, cuffs still locked around his wrists, yet a renewed calm lit his eyes. He didn't speak, letting the silent weight of the moment speak for him. Whatever defense Reed thought he had, it began slipping through his grasp. Whatever confidence Linda had wielded, it faltered under the silent announcement of Olivia's identity. There, in that tense standstill, a single question formed in every mind. Who, exactly, was Olivia Evans? And just how badly had they misjudged Jordan Evans's place in this store? The room fell into a tense hush, as though every breath had been stolen away. Officer Reed lowered his gaze to the badge resting on the counter, and a flicker of realization crossed his face. The words there, etched in bold letters, brought a tightness to his throat. Olivia Evans, Chief FBI. Officer Harris peered over Reed's shoulder, his own eyes widening when he grasped the significance. Linda Harrington, standing near the register, felt her smug composure slip. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. This was not some random woman meddling in police matters. This was someone with genuine authority, authority that could unravel every accusation Linda had thrown at Jordan. Olivia's expression remained guarded, yet steeled with purpose. She let the weight of that title speak for her, while Reed struggled to maintain control of the situation. For a moment, he glanced toward Jordan, then back at Olivia, as if trying to understand how they were connected beyond this singular event. Linda finally found her voice, though it trembled at the edges. How do we know? That's even real, she muttered, attempting to salvage whatever power she had left. Her eyes flicked to Jordan, then back at the badge, betraying her desperation to keep her version of the story afloat. Olivia didn't look at Linda. She directed her words to Reed instead. I assume you have a valid reason for restraining my son. Or did you cuff him without verifying the evidence? Reed's throat tightened. He was identified as a thief, he managed, a note of uncertainty creeping into his tone. We had probable cause. Eyewitness statements. He trailed off, aware of how hollow that defense sounded now. Jordan, still in handcuffs, watched silently, the faintest gleam of hope returning to his eyes. He could almost feel the atmosphere shift, the uneasy swirl of doubt spreading among onlookers. A few customers exchanged worried looks, whispering behind raised hands. The air felt charged, like a thunderstorm about to break. Olivia's gaze swept across the faces around her. Eyewitness statements, she repeated calmly, her voice somehow cutting through the tension. From whom? Linda Harrington. She fixed Linda with a measured stare, then let the silence linger. Because if that's your only basis, we might have a problem, Linda bristled, her cheeks coloring. I saw him take the bracelet, she insisted, her words faltering. He tried to slip it into his pocket. A muscle in Olivia's jaw twitched. My son doesn't steal, she said, each word delivered with quiet conviction. Nor does he slip anything into any pocket. Have you bothered checking the security footage, Officer Reed? That might clarify the situation, Reed exhaled, stalling. We were about to— Were you? Olivia cut in, folding her arms. She glanced pointedly at the cuffs on Jordan's wrists. Because it looks like you decided to arrest him without it. Officer Harris cleared his throat. It would be best to confirm the footage, sir, he said carefully, addressing Reed. Just to be sure, Linda's face tightened. That's not necessary, she snapped. I told you what happened. He dropped the bracelet when I caught him. That's more than enough proof. But her eyes darted to the corner of the store, where the security monitor blinked behind a locked panel. She could sense the wavering trust in the room. Customers who had once given her unwavering support were now frowning, uncertain whether to trust her story or the stark authority behind Olivia's words. Olivia stepped away from the counter, her posture confident, yet somehow reserved, as though she was trying not to dominate the scene more than needed. Officer Reed, she said, perhaps you should see what your body camera shows. I assume you're recording, correct? Reed's jaw clenched. He'd been so caught up in subduing Jordan that he'd paid little attention to the camera on his chest. Now, with every eye on him, the gravity of that footage weighed heavily on his mind. If it revealed them ignoring protocol, this could explode beyond a minor dispute in a jewelry store. A bead of sweat formed at Reed's temple. He gestured stiffly to Harris. Check the cameras, now. Harris nodded, relief and tension colliding on his features. He moved to the back, where the store's surveillance system was housed. Linda stood rooted, her arms folded protectively, as though she could shield herself from the reckoning that footage might bring. Olivia turned to Jordan. Their eyes met, and a silent exchange passed between them. Reassurance, apology, and an unspoken promise that this nightmare was not going to end the way Linda imagined. Jordan's handcuffs still glinted under the store's overhead lights, but something about his posture suggested he felt less trapped than before. Moments stretched. The store's air seemed to hold its breath. Linda shifted on her heels, her confidence cracking at the edges. Reed rocked back slightly, glancing at the door. He knew time was running against him. If that tape proved Jordan's innocence, every decision he'd made, every assumption, would be scrutinized. Finally, Harris emerged. He held a small remote, gaze flicking to Reed, then to Olivia. "We have it," he said quietly. "Should I play it here?" "Yes," Olivia said, in front of everyone. Linda opened her mouth as if to protest, but no words came. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by mounting dread. She knew precisely what that footage would show. Harris pressed a button, and the overhead monitor blinked to life. The image was silent, but clear. Jordan at the counter, picking up the bracelet. Linda watching him. The moment it slipped from his grip, falling to the floor. Jordan's startled reaction. No sign of theft, no attempt to flee, no aggression. The store fell even quieter, if that was possible. Linda stared at the screen, her knuckles blanching against the counter's edge. Reed's expression hardened, but a shadow of guilt flickered there. Harris exhaled, tension draining from his stance. Olivia allowed a beat of silence before speaking. "So," she began, her voice measured. "That's the truth. He dropped it. No stealing, no violence. Just an accident," Linda stammered. I thought. He looked like he was—" "You lied," Olivia said simply, no anger in her tone. Just clarity. "And you, Officer Reed, chose to believe her without question." Reed didn't answer, his mouth tight. Behind him, a few customers exchanged looks of dismay. The camera on the man's phone was still rolling. Linda's composure disintegrated. It wasn't. I will file a formal complaint," Olivia continued calmly. "I will also consider pressing charges for wrongful accusation and potential civil rights violations. Unless you plan to deny what we see right here?" Linda's gaze darted around, searching for an ally in the silent crowd. No one met her eye. Customers once sympathetic now turned their backs, disgust evident. Officer Reed stood rigid, the faint thunder of consequences rumbling in his mind. And Jordan, though still cuffed, was no longer alone or powerless. 3 weeks later, Harrington fine jewelry stood empty. The door, once adorned with a gleaming gold sign, was now simply covered with a dull, closed sign. The lights that once lit up the elegant cases and displayed priceless gems were dimmed. No customers strolled in with their faces lit up by reflections from diamond necklaces. No chatter of high-end deals or soft laughter from satisfied buyers. The air around the shop was thick with the weight of its silence. Inside, the polished counters and glass cases remained untouched. But the aura of exclusivity had vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness. Across the street in his modest car, Jordan Evans sat quietly, staring at the store. His eyes drifted to the same windows he had looked through weeks ago, filled with anticipation for the perfect birthday gift for his sister. Now, they only reflected his own weary expression. The car's engine hummed softly as the world outside moved on, oblivious to the personal reckoning happening within him. He remembered the day Linda Harrington had accused him of stealing, how quickly everything had turned against him. The handcuffs, the stares, the judgment in the air, the fear, the helplessness that gripped him in those moments. He still felt the weight of it, even now as he sat in the comfort of his own car, still processing it all. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. A message from his mother, Olivia, flashed on the screen. "The settlement is almost finalized. The media coverage has been overwhelming, but it's almost done." Jordan read the message, letting the weight of it sink in. Olivia had made sure Linda faced the consequences of her actions. The media had turned its lens onto the jewelry store, its reputation destroyed by the lies Linda had told. News outlets had spread the truth, exposing the wrongful accusations. And now, Linda's name was mud in the community. Her business was no more. The thought didn't bring him satisfaction, though. He wasn't glad to see her life fall apart. He didn't want that. But he knew she had to face the consequences of what she'd done. And it wasn't just about her. It was about the system that allowed such bias to take place unchecked. Jordan leaned back in the seat, his gaze still fixed on the empty store. The questions hadn't stopped, even with the settlement nearly complete. What if his mother hadn't been the FBI chief? What if he didn't have her to intervene on his behalf? Would he have been left to endure the public shame and legal fallout without the chance for justice? The thought gnawed at him. He heard the distant hum of city traffic, the low rumble of cars passing by, people going about their day, unaware of the quiet victory he had won. For him, it wasn't a victory at all. It was a painful reminder that others weren't so lucky. Others like him, with no powerful advocate, with no one to stand up and clear their name. The truth was often the first casualty in such situations, and it wasn't always enough to right the wrongs. Jordan's phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the news. A story about Linda Harrington's downfall had resurfaced. Jewelry store owner faces lawsuit for false accusations. The headline was bold, and the article beneath it outlined how the store's reputation had crumbled, how customers had turned their backs, and how Linda's career had come to an abrupt end. Jordan scrolled through the article, his thoughts distant as he read. Linda had been suspended from her position, and an investigation into her actions was underway. It seemed like the justice he had longed for, but there was still a part of him that couldn't shake the feeling of frustration. She had torn my life apart. That was the thought that lingered. He had been accused of something he didn't do, humiliated in front of strangers, all because Linda decided, without any evidence, that he didn't belong. Her words had caused a ripple effect, pushing him into a nightmare he hadn't been prepared for. Yet, here he was, still standing, still living, but haunted by the what-ifs. The world outside continued on. People passed by the store, giving it only a brief glance, not realizing what had transpired inside. Jordan, in the comfort of his car, knew better. He could see the subtle reactions from people, even as they walked by. The whispers of his name, the slight narrowing of eyes, the discomfort in their gaze when they realized who he was. It wasn't just Linda who needed to face consequences. It was the system that had allowed this kind of treatment to happen without question, without the proper checks and balances. It wasn't enough for Linda to lose her business and face the media backlash. The entire system needed to be held accountable, and that was something Jordan would work towards in his own way, through his quiet actions and by sharing his story. The weight of the day pressed heavily on him, but he didn't let it overwhelm him. He had survived this, and in surviving, he would continue to push for a world where this didn't happen again, where people didn't suffer at the hands of prejudice. Jordan exhaled slowly, looking away from the store and back toward the road. He started the car and pulled away from the curb, the empty store now shrinking in his rearview mirror. It was over for Linda, but not for him. The fight was only just beginning. As the car hummed down the street, Jordan whispered to himself, "They were wrong about me. They were wrong about all of us." His words, though soft, felt like a small, quiet victory against the forces that had tried to take him down.